Okay, so let's have an honest dialogue about issues to do with Palestine, Israel, and secularism and religious freedom, because I think many people are just missing the point of this conflict. If you're wearing yoga pants, carrying a man bun, and find yourself chanting from the river to the sea, espousing an ideology consistent with the Muslim Brotherhood, and taking up a position of the Inquisition, of Jewish identity that seems to have cleaved our community into two factions. On the one side, you have the Zionist Jews who support Israel, and on the other side, you have Jews who, for one reason or another, have been forced to choose a different perspective, mainly in order to get away from the conflict and to avoid your inquisition. There are going to be issues that are discarded along the way that become incredibly important as we move into this new phase, in which issues around Jerusalem become quite abundantly clear. Strip away the Fatah position or the Hamas position. You have the colonial powers wanting to divvy up Jerusalem, and we're going to find some very fiery rhetoric from various factions. This is by no means over. This is, you could say, this is merely the beginning of a process that is taking into a next phase of this conflict, where if we've lost each other along the way because you've adopted a perspective that renders anyone who does not agree with you immediately beyond the pale. The Overton window is determined by whether or not I am considered haram, whether or not I have the taint of whether it's Satan, witchcraft, or Zionism. I think you need to look at your principles. You need to look at your first principles. Let's take some guidance from our founder of our country, Nelson Mandela. Mandela is often misquoted. The quote that you refer to, and you've read it in a lot of Palestine-related literature, is surprisingly a lot different when he said it. He said in 1997, on the 4th of December, he said, "But we know too well that our freedom is incomplete without the freedom of the Palestinians, without the resolution of conflicts in East Timor, the Sudan, and other parts of the world." He also said, shortly after his release in 1990, he said on a United States tour recorded on the Ted Koppel show, he said, "Support for Yasser Arafat in his struggle does not mean that the ANC has ever doubted the right of Israel to exist. Legally, we have stood quite openly and firmly for the right of that state to exist within secure borders." In the same interview, he went on to upbraid then Muammar Gaddafi by stating that in our organization, the ANC, we have Jews, unlike your organization. Speaking directly to the situation where Libya's Jews had been displaced and dispossessed and removed from Libya, like many other Arab states, in a process that began prior to World War II. For instance, the Farhud occurred in 1941 in Iraq, which led to the displacement of the Iraqi Jewish community in the run-up to the Holocaust. A lot of people make, I think, a grave and serious mistake of reading of history to assume that it was merely the creation of the Israeli state that led to the Arab states removing their Jewish populations. That process had already begun and was well established by the time Israel was created in 48. So to focus this on issues to do with secularism and Jewish identity, if you find yourself aligning with the religious police, with the idea that you can wage an inquisition, hold an inquisition, and judge me in absentia. You've already judged me as someone who is beyond the pale because I support the late Nelson Mandela and his perspective as a bipartisan. If you're one of those people, you're still going to have to deal with issues to do with secular identity as a citizen in our own country. And what you do as a result of this conflict will determine how the fabric of our society is either altered, transformed, or defended. So what values do I wish to defend? Well, I believe that Nelson Mandela, when he made the statement about Palestine, in also reference to East Timor, Sudan, and other conflicts on the world, not fixating solely on one conflict, not obsessing on one conflict alone, that he was speaking to the universal values that are enshrined in our Constitution, values such as freedom of religion, freedom of worship, freedom of ideas, thought, belief, opinion, women's rights, LGBT rights, gender rights, the rights of Mother Nature, the rights of a whole range of progressive rights that he, I think, wished to extend to these conflicts. That he wanted, we are not free as South Africans until every other human being on this planet is free, and that is what he meant when he made that statement. I find it very difficult when people adopt a moral position consistent with the Muslim Brotherhood or Hamas or any anti-Zionist struggle that paints Jews who are not have no affinity or are not aligned with your perspective as witches, we wizards, we witches, we taboo, verboten, that there's some kind of justification on the basis that, yes, there were, when the issues were black and white, involving race identity and white supremacy, you could very easily oppose the perspective of a white supremacist. But the conflict in the Middle East is very different. It is not black and white. It is shades of grey. And the perspective that I wish to just open dialogue on are issues to do with the definition of secularism. Secularism is not the absence of religion, it's the absence of religious rules, the absence of religious policing. And I say this as a person who has been locked up on for religious offences in the Republic of South Africa, not during apartheid, but post-apartheid. Locked up because of my case involving the late Robbie Jansen. Locked up for listening to jazz music on a Friday night. I've been labelled as a Jew in contravention of my religion, not by other Jews, but by Muslims wishing to enforce the strictures of my religion. It's very difficult, and when a Christian takes up the cudgels of wishing to enforce rules of a completely different denomination. If you set yourself up, I'm going to monitor observances at my school amongst the different faith groups, and whether it's believers or non-believers. If I set myself up as the arbiter of who is an atheist, who is not an atheist, who is a member of the in-group or the out-group, we're running into difficulties. And that fundamentally, these are the issues that are the crux of the problem in the Middle East conflict that you cannot walk away from. You can dress it up. You can wave around the colors of the Pan-Arab flag. You can wave around the blue and white of the Israeli state, that flag. I don't care which flag you're waving. Ultimately, are you waving around the Universal Declaration of Human Rights? Are you pro-slavery or anti-slavery? Because there are many people in the Middle East are singing the tune of return to slavery. In Yemen, for instance, they readopted what was once abolished. In 2019, the Houthi Yemen adopted, legalized human slavery. It had been de facto a tradition passed on, a customs, traditions passed on, where the group who were enslaved, in most cases, are East Africans. And there's a long history of that slave trade. Mauritania is a good example. We're living on a continent where human trafficking is a huge problem, and a progressive who supports human trafficking, who supports the labeling of black Africans as slaves. I have a problem with that person, and we're gonna run into problems if that is what you're rubber stamping. When you claim to be on the right side of history, what side is the slave trade? Because I do not support slavery. For me, it's one of the a taboo. For me, the primary meaning of the Passover meal is freedom from slavery, as speaking as a people who were formerly enslaved by the Romans, who took the Jews into slavery to the land of Ashkenaz, along those Jews who ended up along the Rhineland. There's an arch of Titus in Rome that depicts the loot, the booty. It's a triumphal arch with the temple candelabra, the menorah, and the Jewish slaves being led into slavery. You know, they would have gone under that, some of these arches. They would have been sold off the Circus Maximus. Some of them would have been put to death for sport. The triumph of Christianity over that empire ultimately resulted in the civilization that we have today, the Renaissance. I don't think would have happened if the Roman Empire had not gone through a decline. That there was a necessary process that led to that decline as a result of the excesses of that civilization, as a result of the dictatorship that ran that civilization, very different to the earlier Greek civilization. So when I rise to this defense of civilized norms and standards, the status quo in a world where there was an abolition of slavery as a result of the abolition of slavery in the British Empire, and we open the door to a conversation that is centered around the Orient, centered around the Levant, and centered around the Middle East, we run the risk that unless we have a first principle approach to the problem, we are essentially throwing out the baby with the bathwater. We're throwing out our own secular values. And I've learned to my detriment what that entails, where there have been no defenders of secularism in this country. There are very few and far between. If anyone is out there willing to defend secularism as it pertains to the South African legal system, please make yourself heard, because I'm appealing to you. My own case involving the late Robbie Jansen, involving the history of jazz music, involving my byline and my identity as a secular Jew, has been squashed by this attempt to invert reality, to invert the facts of apartheid. And as we've seen in the last week, inverting the sequence of events which occurred around the 7th of was it the October massacre. So I'm going to leave it at that. I'll continue reaching out. As always, please subscribe, and I'm willing to have any honest debate with anyone reaching out to South Africa. Thank you so much.